Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, welcome to the program, welcome to the show. I am your host, Mark Goldberg, and this is Mark Vlogs Watches. We have a controversial topic today, and that is, of course, Rolex and how Rolex tricks you into buying their watches. Trust me, it is not by accident that the public is so enamored of this brand, and it ranks as the highest recognition name brand luxury watch maker in the world, bar none, even though it doesn't necessarily have the highest or best horology. So before we start, a couple of quick housekeeping things, and the first of those is don't hate. Some of you are unapologetic Rolex fanboys, much like myself, and others of you are absolute haters of the brand, and there is room for both of us in the watch collecting milieu, okay? So I am not here to tell you that Rolex is necessarily better than the brand that you like, or that they're not stuffy, or that it's not impossible and difficult to buy them. There's a lot to be annoyed with about Rolex. I'm with you guys, at least on that. It is my favorite brand. But I just play the game, guys. I don't make the rules. Okay, and then the final bit of housekeeping before we proceed is the quick fist watch check. And here we go. Guys, I'm a dog trainer. Please support me and this channel by buying a copy of my latest book, The Art of Training Your Dog. Hardcover or electronic. You can get it globally. If you're not a dog lover, buy it for someone who is, and subscribe to this channel so we can do this again soon. Throw a like on this video. Now let's get along with the fist watch check. Today, fellas, I'm not wearing a Rolex at all, sort of. I'm wearing the Tudor Panda chronograph. Tudor, of course, being the sister company of Rolex, and will bear mention here. I've got some notes, so occasionally I'm going to have to, look down to consult those notes. This is going to be a three-pronged video, so it might be a bit of waffling on, apologies in advance, but I have lots of points to make. So let's get started. How does Rolex trick you into buying their watches and into wanting their watches? Well, the first way they do that is with an incredibly intensive and very well-considered advertising and marketing program. Rolex spends approximately $100 million per year on advertising and marketing, and that's a lot of money, obviously, but not only do they invest like quantity, but they're very, very, very strategic in terms of where they spend their money, because what they want to do is to create an incredible cachet for the brand, and they want to attract like the most upper crusty people possible into their fold and into the brand, because that has a tendency to trickle down into like normal people like me. I'm a dog trainer. I mean, I'm in dress clothes right now. I think I own a tie, but I'm sure I don't own a pair of dress shoes, okay? So, I'm not the hoity-toity hoi polloi, but there's this trickle-down effect. But I digress. $100 million on marketing equals $1 billion per decade invested strategically to create a market, a cachet for this brand. So let's just really quick talk about even the history of event sponsorship, which includes a few things marketing does. Event sponsorship, brand ambassadors, product placement. We're going to talk about all of those things. First, we're not going to belabor the history, but most of you know the originator of the brand, the founder, the owner of the brand was Hans Wilsdorf. He lived in Germany, England, Switzerland, a lot of different places. But anyway, I think he's usually considered to be British, and he founded this brand in the 20s. And it started out as sort of like not necessarily the upper crust luxury brand that it is today, but a more robust, a more usable watch, with less tendency to break, because watches were super delicate back in those days. And what Hans Wilsdorf wanted to do was to showcase Rolex as being waterproof or water resistant, which was that was a brand new concept back then. Shock resistant. In other words, a watch that could take it and was worth paying more. So one of the first things that he did was, back in 1926, he sponsored the first British woman ever to swim the English Channel, and he put a Rolex Oyster on her. That Rolex Oyster, very similar to the Rolex Oyster Perpetual, except for it wasn't perpetual, which means it was hand wine. Oyster Perpetual, which they still sell. I've got the turquoise, the green, and the dark blue in that, as you well know, the OP41. But the first iteration of that was called the Oyster Perpetual, and it was hand wound. I've been on the English Channel, guys. I took, one time back in the day before the Channel, I took the hovercraft from England to the Calais, which is, the English Channel separates, for those of you who are Americans, who separates England and France. And it is a rough, choppy piece of water. Let me tell you what. So I'm on this hovercraft. It's like banging over the top of the waves. And they were served food for the first half of the voyage. In the second half of the voyage, they were cleaning it up out of the aisles. Guys, I don't know why they would ever have served food on that thing. Very, very rough water. And so this lady, in 1926, swims the English Channel wearing a Rolex, and it still worked when she got to the other side. So, man, ever since that time, Rolex has been very adept at spending their money at places where it would attract a whole lot of notice, right? And it would create a cachet. The sense that Rolex was exciting and excellent in many areas. So these days, they sponsor yachting teams, equestrian events, horse racing, hunter jumper, like stuff that rich people do. They sponsor golf, the British Open. They sponsor tennis, the US Open. Car racing, I don't know if it's Formula One or what they do in car racing. Tell me in the comments if you are picking up on any Rolex sponsored events that I'm missing here. But there are a lot of them, and they are expensive, upper crusty sports. Mountain climbing and exploring, and even undersea stuff, which is obvious ever since they were working with companies like Comex to perfect, the helium escape valve on the Sea Dweller. But even today, they have the James Cameron edition of the Deep Sea Dweller, and they make a whole big deal about sending one of those down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So Rolex is all about making money by teaming up with exciting people who are on the cutting edge of amazing things that people do on this earth. So they are still sponsoring events. The next thing that they do is they ally themselves with brand ambassadors who bring honor to the tribe. I want to be like these guys. Now, I've only got 3 names for you right now of people who are theoretically current sponsors. Jackie Stewart from the racing world, Roger Federer from tennis. I assume he's going to hold his ambassadorship, but he literally just retired from his professional career in tennis. And Michael Bublé, the singer. So these are paid brand ambassadors. But I can't prove this next point, but I strongly suspect that we also have people who receive favorable treatment from Rolex, and Rolex uses their body as product placement. Now, Rolex doesn't pay to get into the movies the way that Omega does. There's a reason that James Bond wears an Omega Seamaster in the last several decades worth of movies. The first watch that was ever showcased in a James Bond movie was a Rolex, but James Bond producers approached Rolex to pay for it, and Rolex said, nah, we're good. And so they went to Omega, who pays for that. But listen, you've seen famously, Rolex is on a lot of famous people, including Ellen DeGeneres, Mark Wahlberg, a bunch of sports figures, and these guys are wearing the impossible to get stuff. So do some of them buy their Rollies? I'm sure they do, but I think Rolex probably goes way out of their way to make sure that Mark Wahlberg can be wearing whatever he wants to on his wrist. As long as it's Rolex, that's a good thing for them. So we see our sports heroes, the actors that we want. We see mountain climbing, all that stuff, undersea exploration, and all of it's got the word Rolex attached to it, and that makes an impression on us, especially when they're spending $100 million a year on top of it for print advertising and the like. Okay, the next major area that Rolex is using to sort of manipulate the market and create a little bit of trickery to get you to want and buy their watches is the whole concept of exclusivity. I mean, if you think about it, it's really kind of an odd situation in that Rolex is a mass market produced thing. They say they make about 1 million watches a year. That's current conventional wisdom. Whereas there are other brands with much higher horology that make a tiny fraction of that with more hand finishing than Rolex does. However, those brands, although they're somewhat known, are a hell of a lot less known and less desired than Rolex. How do they create that air of exclusivity? Well, we already talked about how they market and product placement that creates demand. But there are other things that they do to help create the cachet, the sense that Rolex is exclusive. And one of those things is you're not buying them online, okay? Rolex is sold only through AD or authorized dealer locations. And although there are numerous of those scattered throughout the world, there is one overriding principle that governs all of these independent jewelry stores and locations. And that is that they are all premium locations. So where you find a Rolex AD is not on the cheap side of the tracks, okay? Rolex specifically picks its distribution partners, clientele, if you will, for companies with a track record in business and also companies who have great retail location. So they don't want to be in a strip mall, they want to be in the best part of town with the highest rent, and that means that the owner of the AD is paying pretty significant rent. Rolex wants to determine what is the square footage of the entire store, and then Rolex is going to demand, per their authorized distribution contract, a specific percentage of that square footage be devoted to Rolex. So what you'll notice when you go into a Rolex AD who sells jewelry and other brands, Rolex is going to be right up front, and there's going to be a lot of square footage from that store that's going to be dedicated to the Rolex line. You'll never find Omega in the front of the store and Rolex in the back. It's always the reverse, and there is a reason for that. So the amount of square footage which is dedicated to Rolex is controlled, and in the location within the store and then the location of the store itself. And also you'll notice that the furnishings, okay, anything that has to do with the Rolex area of the store, which includes the cases where the watches are stored, any furniture, the mats that they put the watch on when they're cleaning it up, the gloves, everything is not only Rolex branded, but it's extremely premium. And none of that stuff, the AD does not go, okay, to the jewelry supply, .com to buy any of these furnishings. Rolex sells them those furnishings because Rolex wants control over all of the furnishings, the chairs in that area. Everything must be premium and Rolex designed, Rolex approved, Rolex sold, so that they have control over the way the brand is being presented, and it must always be presented at a very high level to create cachet and that extreme sense of exclusivity, guys. The next way that they create exclusivity is by not having any inventory. And it's maddening for those of us who would like to actually buy the occasional watch from Rolex, but they just don't have any inventory. And do I believe that the worldwide situation just made it impossible for Rolex to keep up with demand? No, I don't. That was a 6-week setback for them a year and a half ago. They're well over it. So I think what's happening here is that Rolex is deliberately keeping the pressure on the marketing to create high demand, and then they are deliberately manufacturing and delivering below that level, and that gap between what I want and what I can have creates exclusivity and actually intensifies the desire. It's a moving target. A lot of you are just so disgusted with Rolex that you've given up on the brand. And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's how you feel, I can't entirely say I blame you. Because it's a moving target. Like how long you have to wait, how many hoops you have to jump through to get one versus the amount of inventory. If the gap is like that, if it's too huge, like trying to buy a Ferrari, where you got to give, blood in order to be able to, buy your first one, people will give up. Rolex, I feel like they want to keep us in the game, honestly. So I think that they are tweaking what they deliver and what they manufacture to just create a sense of I want it, but I can't have it, but I want to keep trying. The next thing I think that they use as a matter of trickery to convince you to want that watch, to put your name on the list, to part with your hard-earned dollars for a mass-produced watch of great quality, right, guys? I have no complaints about the quality of Rolex. I do love the brand. But we do have to understand, they got business practices here, and these are very smart people who are creating demand based on a little bit of smoke and mirrors. We at least have to be aware of that. Exhibition pieces. Now, when you go into the AD today, you will find that the cases are not utterly empty the way they were only a year ago. I mean, if you go back a year, Actually, over the last 3 years, even before things happen with the you know what, the, the cases have just been literally empty. And it was demoralizing to walk into an AD who had all this square footage, all these furnishings dedicated to Rolex, and they didn't have any Rolex to look at. Really demoralizing. But it took Rolex, I don't know, like a couple of years to figure out, we better make some fully functional watches. The exhibition only watch is a fully functional watch. It has a movement, it has box, it has papers, it's ready to go. They just tell the AD, here is a case full of stuff. And I'm not sure, guys, if you're an AD and if you know about this, put it in the comments. But I'm pretty sure that Rolex doesn't supply that AD with the box and papers, or the papers really, because the ADs stock up their own boxes. But I don't think the AD supplies the paper, the warranty, card on the exhibition only watch until they authorize the AD to sell it. And that's what happens. So if there's a blue Sky Dweller sitting at the AD, it'll have a little, card that says exhibition only, which is better than not being able to see one. Gosh, in the last 6 months, I've tried on all kinds of beautiful rollies that I haven't been able to purchase because they're exhibition only. But I got to try on a blue Sky Dweller to see what I thought. I got to try on the two-tone bluesy Submariner in 41 millimeters to see how I felt about it. They have I tried on a two-tone Daytona to see how it felt. So it's important that you recognize that Rolex really thought about what do we do about those empty cases, and the bit of trickery that they're employing now is they will let you try on a watch. They will let you lust over it. They will let you get emotional over it. They just won't let you buy it until they're damn good and ready to do so. So it is a bit of trickery having those exhibition pieces, but personally I think that's a step in the right direction. It really makes you want the watch though. If you can wear it, you really want to wear it out of the store. And then the final way that I want to talk about today that Rolex creates exclusivity is specific to instructions that I believe that they have given their ADs across the world. This is not specific to any one AD. This is Rolex reps all around the world have spoken to their ADs and asked them to sell to clients who the AD knows, and that the AD has very good reason to believe that the client that they sell the Rolex to will not flip it. Now, every AD understands, hey, if I sold you a watch 3-4 years ago, you might need to trade out of it at some point. But what they're really trying to do is prevent the guy from purchasing the watch, driving into the parking lot, and calling one of the resellers to just immediately part with it for an immense profit. Could Rolex do more in that area? Yes. Do I think they do enough to prevent flipping? No, I don't. But there's lots that they could do, okay? But we'll talk more about the gray market in a minute, because actually I think that the gray market is part of the problem, but I also think that Rolex tolerates it to create exclusivity and upward pressure on pricing. But hang on, we'll get there. They've asked the AD, sell to people that you know, and that those people are not going to flip the watch. That is why. The AD isn't going to tell you this. Goldberg is going to tell you this. That is why you have a hard time walking into an AD with no purchase history and creating purchase history. Because let me tell you guys, when I was a kid, when I was a young man in my 30s, which is very long ago, but when I was, I walked into the AD, pointed to the Rolex that I wanted, 1987, and they brought out like 15 of them. The cases were jam-packed. And I just kind of tried on a bunch of them until I picked one out. I still have it, a 34 millimeter date in two-tone with a Jubilee bracelet. I still have it. Want to see it? It's right here. Anyway, those cases were full and you bought whatever you want. There was no interview process. You did not have to give blood. Well, those days are long gone, because the pressure between what the watch retails for and what it goes for in the secondary market has really increased, and therefore that created this whole layer of people who jumped into the hobby not out of the love for the watch, but out of the love for the monetary gain or that level of prestige. And so that created a whole industry of flipping. And again, I think it's inadequate what Rolex has done, so really don't blame me for this, but they have told the ADs, if you don't know them, don't sell to them. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. It's probably nowhere in writing because that'd probably be illegal, but that's what I think they've done. And by the way, if you're an AD, obviously you're really going to try pretty hard. If you're a good AD, you're going to try very hard to do nothing illegal, immoral, or unethical. If you're a bad AD, you don't care. You just want the money. And guys, there's both kinds of ADs in the world. I prefer to deal with the good AD because, it's not about bribery. It's just about relationship and love of the watches. That's me. Okay, let's talk about pricing. Another way that Rolex has employed trickery to get you to want the watch, they've had to employ trickery because the price of the watches has increased astronomically between then and now. So let's go back come with me now, back to 1987. When I walked into the first AD that I ever purchased a watch from, that time when I showed you the watch, and the cases were jammed full. You could negotiate small discounts if you were asking for something that wasn't especially popular. But I seem to recall the Steel Submariner back in 1987 was priced at approximately $1,200. And that gold date that I looked at, I think it was more like 2,000, which is crazy, if you think about it now, because that little gold and steel date that I bought, it has appreciated a little bit over its $2,000. Maybe I could sell it for $2,500 or $3,000, now. But that $1,200 sub is now $12,000 to $15,000, $18,000. It's a lot more. Vintage subs are the shiz, whereas these older dates and Datejust not so much. And that same watch, that same Rolex date is now in the $9,000 range, $9,500 range new. And on the secondary market, it's fallen from its high of 20 and now it's probably somewhere in the vicinity of, for the 41 millimeter ones, probably 14 to 16. By the way, the 40 millimeter, I still think it's currently the sweet spot. You can probably pick that up for $12 in papers if you look hard, right? The modern ceramic 40 millimeter. But nonetheless, what are we talking about? The $1,200 watch went to $12,000. How do they get you to pay that? By all the stuff that we've been talking about here. One of the things they've been doing is they've been nudging those prices up. There's been 2 price increases this year in various parts of the world. The US only had 1, England had 2. So there've been a lot of incremental price increases in the year. And now, to just quickly address the gray market, I believe that, as I said, there's a lot that Rolex could do in order to phase the gray market out. Every one of these watches has a unique identifier. They know exactly where each watch came from. So all they would have to do would be a little better policing and just close down those ADs who are selling out the back door. But, they do just enough of that to feel okay, about, shaving and looking themselves in the mirror. But I don't think they do a very good job of it at all. So I think that the gray market is tolerated because it is helping create the cachet that this watch that I am purchasing for X it's worth double X, which creates the temptation to flip it. So it's kind of a vicious cycle here. But I believe that they're tolerating the gray market. The final thing that I kind of want to talk about before I get into my wrap up about how Rolex employs a bit of trickery to get you to want the watch and pay this much for the watch is relating to Tudor. Rolex is going to get you coming or going. If you don't want to pay for the Panda Daytona, which costs, I don't know, I think it's around $14,000 retail. But if you don't want to go pay $35 for the Panda gray market, because they tolerate the gray market, well then you can get the Panda Tudor, which retails for around $6,000 US. And by the way, it's a phenomenal watch. If there's anything I don't love about it, it's that thickness. You can see it's kind of slab-sided and it's thick. But it wears well. It wears easy. It's a really nice watch. It's got that creamy dial. I like it a whole lot. But Tudor is the sister company to Rolex, if you will. Rolex and Tudor are both owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. So Hans Wilsdorf, the genius who put the first Rolex on that lady who swam the English Channel back in 1926, when he died, he left Rolex and its sister company Tudor wrapped under the umbrella of the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, which is a Swiss non-profit foundation. And the Swiss are very secretive in their banking laws and apparently in their charitable laws too. So we don't know much about how that company operates. But we do know that Rolex and Tudor are operating in tandem. And as Rolex began to become exclusive and their prices started nudging up, Tudor started to become exclusive and their prices started nudging up too. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, this Tudor watch, if you want to get one, man, you probably ought to have some buying history with the AD, and you're probably going to wait like a year. I bought this one on the secondary market, bought it from my friend, the rancher. But before I bought it, I called my AD, who also sells Tudor and Rolex, and I said, "Hey, guys, can you get me one of these?" And my contact over there was like, because I told him I got a shot at it used. I just don't want you to be offended if I buy it used when you're thinking I could have bought it from you. And he's like, no. You could probably just go get that used. He said, because we've got a long list of people waiting for these. He goes, and we're seeing none of them. It had been months since they had seen one. Tudor is employing the same. They're on Rolex's coattails. Tudor, I'm going to give them credit. They are a little more daring in terms of introducing new models like this one. Much more daring than Rolex is. They've introduced a lot of cool stuff in just the last 6 months. But try and buy them. There are weights, there is exclusivity, they are holding their value, they're not double retailed, but they are hard to get. So it seems to me, to wrap it all up now, what's the game plan here? What is this trickery that Rolex employs to get you to want and buy their watches? What's the end game? And here's what I think. Rolex has decided that they want to become Patek Philippe. Now, Patek Philippe makes less than 100,000 watches per year, and Rolex makes 1 million. Patek Philippe manufactures tons of their parts, their assemblies. There's an incredible amount of handwork. The hours that a master watchmaker spends tinkering with a Patek Philippe is much, much greater than what goes into a Rolex, okay? Now, every Rolex is touched by human hands, we know that. So the case assembly, testing, adjustment, I'm sure that human hands are doing that on Rolex. But at the same time, it's probably a little like this. Those rollies are flying down the conveyor belt, and a Rolex watchmaker is going, touched you, touched you, touched you, touched you. Whereas the Patek Philippe guy, he's working for, weeks on one watch. And that is why they are so expensive. You do not own you never actually own your Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for future generations. And with Rolex, you never really own your place on the Rolex wait list. You merely look after it for future generations, Rolex wants to supplant Patek Philippe in terms of pricing, cachet, exclusivity, even though they're making 10 times more watches. That's the end game. And so Rolex is going to move up into Patek territory, and they are bringing Tudor right behind them to fill the gap that will have been left by a Rolex. Guys, this was a long video. If you stuck with me this long, I really want to appreciate it. Talk to me in the comments about what you think about all this nonsense. Goldberg, peace out.
Paint the sky.